You need to give yourself permission that in each different season of your life, we are women, we are multidimensional beings, we are cyclical beings. We all are going through different, you can go through 500 seasons in maybe not 500 in a year, but you can go through a lot of seasons even in a year because it's just your cycle. Can you give yourself permission to honor all versions of you rather than thinking one version of you is better than another version of you? What truths or beliefs have you internalized that you don't actually want to believe about being a woman? What are they? You need to start detaching from that programming because it is absolutely inhibiting your ability for your nervous system to feel fully safe in you locking into true feminine embodiment. Also, healing anything around it feels quote unquote safer to be in your masculine. That is just a form of self-protection. It is not necessarily safer to be in your masculine. A lot of us can internalize that because in the past, we have felt like our softness or our femininity or just our female body has gotten us into really bad circumstances. This will often be coupled with a fear of being seen, and it can be coupled with fear of beauty. So we basically don't allow ourselves to be beautiful, to radiate, to be magnetic. This can show up as skin issues, for example, because it's like, oh, if you have a face of acne or if you have really bad eczema, it makes you feel, right? This doesn't actually make you uglier, but if you internalize it as it makes me uglier and therefore I'm safer. That's a really big one for a lot of women where they actually feel unsafe in their beauty. So they hide their beauty. And you remember, your beauty isn't just physical, it's also energetic. So you can be hiding that magnetism and like your aura and internalizing, I'm only safe if I have this hyper masculine armor around me. So you then, for that, you're working on healing the root of what has caused you to put that armor around you. It could be sexual trauma, it could be programming, it could be something that your dad said to you or your mum said to you when you were younger, or maybe they said to you a lot of times. It could be something from when you were a teenager. You know what it also could have been something from, which often gets forgotten, is the impact of micro trauma where it turns into macro trauma. So you might have heard me talk about micro trauma before, and let me give an example. So micro trauma is something where a lot of people will not think that, like, they won't associate that with trauma because it's such a little thing. And it's a bad thing that we do. I talk about this in the book because we really gaslight ourselves. Then we don't allow ourselves to get the healing that we absolutely deserve to then live the life that we also deserve. So I'll use an example of perfectionism. So perfectionism has come from a moment of like quote unquote smaller trauma compared to what others would define as big trauma, but it's actually not necessarily smaller trauma, because that moment of perfectionism from when you were, let's say, 5 years old, where you felt like, okay, the only way to get love is to get straight A's. Maybe not when you're 5, but whatever, roll with me. The only way to be loved is to basically be perfect. You then continue to live that out for your whole entire life. So now you're 25 and the perfectionism has caused you to basically feel like, oh, I have to just be perfect in any relationship that I'm in. So as you're dating, you are not being your full truest self because you think that he wants this perfect cool girl woman. So you're silencing your truth. You're not saying the thing that you want to say. You're having sex when you don't want to have sex, right? Now what could happen, and this is an example of how it leads on to macro trauma, is now let's just say you are in a relationship where you are getting sexually assaulted. Now you have macro trauma. But everybody thinks about childhood trauma. Everybody focuses on the childhood. Well, maybe you didn't have any sexual trauma in your childhood, but that instance when you were 25, that wasn't the first moment of the root of that trauma. The first moment was when you were 5, when your mom or your dad made you feel like, in order to be loved, I have to be perfect and to please them. Can you see how that's translated? Because it's unhealed and you've continued to live it out, and it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger in your body, and it will show up it'll basically morph into a multitude of different ways of how it will show up. And then you've actually gotten into a more traumatic situation for the average person because of something that started when you were 5 that was quote unquote small. So when we think about trauma, I don't want you to think about in terms of just these big things. You can have grown up in a quote unquote perfect childhood and still experience trauma. You can be in a great place in your life right now, but want more for yourself. You do not need to be at the depths of despair, hitting rock bottom in order to be emailing me or DMing me or joining a program or coming to the immersion. This is like this space that I hold for all of you is not just for those of you that are in the depths of your shit. It's also for those of you that are, your life's fine, everything's good, but you want more. Allow yourself to deserve, to validate that you're allowed to have more, that you're allowed to heal even some of those smaller things. Because a lot of women will say to me like, oh, I don't have like that much trauma, blah, blah, blah. Once we get into it, I'm like, you have a lot of trauma. Like, I'm not telling them this, I'm just thinking in my head, like, you have a lot of trauma. It's just that you have not allowed yourself to validate these struggles as something that you should work on. You've probably, most of the time, what happens is you internalize it as it's just my personality, when it's not necessarily just your personality. Once you've healed your stuff, then you can actually be like, okay, what was my personality versus what was the trauma response? So for me, for example, it is in my personality to be a go-getter and to like have big goals for myself and be achieving what I want. Like, that is very much in my personality. But what's not in my personality is how I used to work. So I used to say like, oh, it's just my personality. It's just the way that I'm wired, blah, blah, blah. Basically just, I would be burning myself out essentially. And it was coming from this place of what I didn't know at the time, but what it actually was is I feel more worthy and more lovable when I am achieving. Now I don't have that. I just have like 500 creative ideas in my head at all times and need to do something with them. But you can make those differentiations once you aren't being blocked by your trauma. The feminine cannot fully open, and the openness is the receptivity, the magnetism, the surrender. And why we want to open, ladies, and we actually talked about this yesterday in the Muse Masterclass as well. If you haven't signed up for that, put the link below. When you are open, when the feminine is open, once your body actually feels safe to open, that is when you are able to magnetize your dream life in. That's when you don't have to do a bunch of things to manifest. You don't have to be journaling every day, doing 300 mantras, like chanting under the trees. You don't have to be doing any of that because our natural state as the feminine is receptivity. We make manifestation harder for ourselves when we are doing it all in our head and our body does not feel safe to actually receive what it is that we want. Once our body feels safe to open and receive that, you don't even have to be doing that much and your words just become your spells. But the feminine cannot fully open when we are holding on to unprocessed grief or resentment or unmet needs from childhood or feeling like, oh, I can only be loved if I'm perfect, that kind of stuff. Like, think about this. Was your mom chronically self-abandoning or overgiving? That's probably a mother wound that you need to work on, that she's passed down to you, that you've internalized. Was your dad emotionally unavailable or unpredictable? Again, how has that then affected your relationship with the masculine and therefore with the feminine? Now, obviously those can get flipped. It's not like, oh, mom's the only one that can be overgiving. Dad can obviously have that too. I'm just using generalizations from what I've seen from clients. So when we have these patterns and these blueprints that have been given to us by our parents or our guardians or social conditioning or school or friendship groups or whatever it is, these patterns embed themselves, ladies and gentlemen, into our nervous system. And once they've embedded themselves into our nervous system, that then dictates what we think and what we feel safe in our adulthood, and also obviously in our teenage years too, but most of us are adults listening to this. That dictates what feels safe in our adulthood. Let's talk about money trauma for a second. People will ask me like, okay, what is the trauma around not feeling safe to hold money? AKA I'm shopping all the time and like I never have money in my bank account, as an example. If your nervous system was wired to feel like money causes fights, let's just say, why would you feel safe then having a lot of money? Because money equals fights to your nervous system. So every time you get money in, what are you going to do? You're going to spend it. You're going to get rid of it. And this is unconscious in the sense of it has been programmed into your nervous system. So this is the way that you live until You do the deep, deep, deep somatic work and nervous system reprogramming, and then you'll experience what you've probably seen other clients write to me on, and I've shared on my Instagram stories and all that kind of stuff. You'll then experience that feeling of like, oh my God, I feel that thing now, Monica, where I'm not having to think about changing my behavior. I'm no longer drawn to that instance, or I'm no longer triggered by this thing. And very often how that will show up for my clients is they realize it after the fact. I had one of my clients the other day message me saying that she realized that she, usually when she goes to get her hair done, she'll like have lunch at this place afterwards or whatever, but she'll spend like 15 minutes going back and forth in her head with this like anxiety spiral of, do I have lunch there? Do I not? Do I have, like, what are people going to think of me? I'm sitting alone, like going through this whole fucking thing in her head. And she messaged me being like, yesterday I didn't even realize this until after the fact, but I went to the hairdresser and I thought, oh, I'm just going to get some lunch. And I popped into the cafe, sat there by myself, had lunch. And I didn't realize until later, oh my God, I just went to the cafe, sat there and had lunch by myself. And there wasn't this whole thought process about it. That is the magic. I hope you can kind of like, I hope that example helps you to like feel it a little bit, because it's hard to explain sometimes, but it's like, that is the magic of this work that I do, that you don't have to sit there in your car and do 10 deep breathing exercises and tap your eyebrows and then be like, okay, it's safe for me to go into the cafe. You don't even think about the fucking cafe anymore. You just go into the cafe because of what we are doing on such a deep, deep level. And it works quickly, obviously to an extent, versus you having to use a deep breathing technique for the next 10 years of your life. When I say it works quickly when you do the healing and then do the integration. A lot of people stop at the healing. Do not do that. This woman in Queen Alchemy was sharing with me, I put this like voice message in the group about navigating the quote unquote gap, which is like basically the gap between your past self and your future self. And she replied being like, oh my God, like, can you be in the gap for like 3 years? She shared how she'd been working with like a not so expert coach, and it basically has just put her in this gap feeling ever since working with her. And she was just like, oh my God, I feel so validated, blah, blah, blah. She was basically just told when doing, healing work to just relax, just relax, just relax. You do not want to just do healing and leave yourself high and dry, because then that's where you miss the embodiment aspect. Hence, when I say feminine embodiment, we're not just stopping at the healing around the feminine and your relationship with being a woman and the feminine and the masculine. You're then also going into the embodiment of the feminine so that it sticks. So that 10 years later, you're feeling more and more and more in your body and in yourself. You don't feel like you have to do a bajillion things each day to be in your feminine.